Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. It has been an eventful week, to say the least. And we're going to talk about that in much more detail during tomorrow's sermon. Sorry, I can only put so much into each slot. But tonight I just wanted to mention at the outset a very unfortunate, painful, and pernicious idea that has been going around, picked up by some of the top pundits out there, that this war was started by Chabad. Now, I have many disagreements with Chabad. Many. That would be a whole nother series of sermons. But I cannot blame the war with Iran on Chabad. Not, well, at all. But the underlying concept that is used to try and justify why Chabad is at somehow fault is that Chabad wants to build the third temple. The third temple would need to stand on the Temple Mount, currently occupied by the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, and therefore Israel is trying to precipitate a casus belli where they can bulldoze that area and build the third temple. And Chabad, with its mighty power, was somehow able to convince the United States government and the rest of the Middle East to go to war in order to make this happen. This is common anti-Semitic trope that had been going around for a few thousand years, just polished up and inserted into the modern narrative. And we'll talk more about why that is happening again tomorrow's sermon. But I want to point out how our learned pundits who had figured out this wonderful conspiracy couldn't be bothered to notice that there is one key ingredient which would convince anybody that this cannot be what's happening. We don't have a red cow. We don't have a red cow. This is Parashat Adumah. This is the parasha where we read about the red heifer. Looking around the room, most of you probably don't even know what a heifer is. I think you know what a cow is. But I'm talking literally about a red cow, a red female cow that had been purposely set aside for a very special purpose. And that was that it could go through a ritual in which it would be sacrificed, turned to ash, its ash mixed with water, and then that water would be sprinkled upon particular people. Now, what in the world was going on in this ritual? Well, what was happening was, in Judaism, we have different forms of ritual impurity. Right? This is not some sort of infection. This is not about cleanliness. This is about a certain disruption in our current feeling to be able to draw close to God in the most intimate of ways, namely in the temple, or prior to that, in the tabernacle in the desert. Now, among all the different things that can render a person ritually impure, the top level of ritual impurity comes from being in contact with a human corpse. To be in contact with a human corpse is to render a person at the highest level of ritual impurity, which can then be conveyed to things they touch and onward down through a descending chain of ritual impurity. There are literally volumes written on all of this. We're not going to go through the entire degrees. However, the question then becomes, how do you recover from that ritual impurity? Because you kind of have to, especially in the ancient world where the temple was the center of our ritual life. You need to get rid of this impurity somehow, and it doesn't wash off. Again, another reminder, this is not standard dirtiness, which our ancestors knew all too well, and they knew how to take baths. This is not what they were talking about. Well, the solution is the red cow. Take the cow, you reduce it into ash, you mix that ash with water, and then you sprinkle that water on a person who had been touched, a corpse, and after that 7-day period, they are now ritually pure again. Very important if you are a Kohen, because otherwise no one would be able to officiate at any sacrifices, which is why the third temple can't be built at the moment in any event. Because without such a cow, we have no way to purify our Kohanim, and that means they wouldn't be able to do anything in the building anyway, so why would we build it? But let's get back to that red cow, because you're all still looking at me like this is a little weird, and that's okay. This is famously known as one of the halachot, the laws, that flummoxed even King Solomon with all of his wisdom of what in the world is going on here. And I'm not going to say that I know better than Solomon and can explain the details of the ritual. But I do want to point out one aspect of it that makes it especially perplexing, which is while you are sprinkling the water and preparing the cow and doing all the elements that will then render the target ritually pure, you become ritually impure. It's a different degree of ritual impurity. It's not the same as those who are handling a body, but you, the officiant, become ritually impure through the same ceremony that the target becomes ritually pure. It is very confusing. And I believe that that is exactly the reason for the ritual itself, that we are trying to understand the paradox of death, that we are not treating death as something that is simple. When someone dies, yes, what we must do to bury them, lay them to rest, to show them respect, that is fairly straightforward and clear in Judaism. But how we feel? Judaism acknowledges through this ritual that we are a whirlwind of different emotions, and that any solution that tries to reduce it to simple platitudes is very unhelpful. If you simply say to somebody, oh, well, you know, we all die someday. Death is just a part of life. This is the natural order of things. It's a very hollow sense of comfort when you are going through that process, when you have been confronted with somebody actually dead there in front of you. And likewise, if you are to fall too far into that sense of despair, depression, or nihilism that comes from witnessing another person's remains, that too would be life-altering. And so Judaism comes and brings through this ritual a mix and says, yes, it's terrible. This is about the worst experience a person can have, apart from actually dying. And as such, we expect you to be shaken. And we're not going to just snap our fingers and tell you everything's okay, it's all fine, this is just totally natural. But we're also not going to tell you, you're right, you will live with the stigma of this contact for the rest of your life. You are forever altered and can never recover yourself and your balance and equilibrium. Judaism says no on both. We, as usual, walk the more difficult middle path and says, we've got a ritual for you. And it's going to be confusing because death is confusing and your emotions are confusing. And it will give you time, the 7-day period, to pull yourself out of this. And it will give you an opportunity to reflect and an opportunity to acknowledge that there are things beyond our understanding, but that nonetheless our tradition prepares us to deal with. Now, in the modern world, like I said, we don't have a red cow. Trust me, people are looking, but we have not found a suitable candidate that would be able to meet the criteria to be used for this ritual. So, at the moment, nobody is getting any rocks ready to build a third temple. But we do have a number of other rituals which try to supplement this same process. When we have a burial, there are numerous elements, both for the burial as well as the Shiva, that are there to help give those that mourn an opportunity to reflect, whether it be privately or, as is more common, with other friends coming. We wash hands before coming into a house as a symbol of this purity ritual, of saying that the ritual impurity that came from my dishevelment through the process of contact with this moment is now going to be set to one side. But we don't hurry the process. Those that mourn sit Shiva for 7 days, and then we gradually relinquish some of the trappings of grief, but still for the next 30 days, there are limitations on what we can or can't do to try and give us that additional time to acclimate to our status. And if it is the loss of a parent, which is all the more destructive to our sense of equilibrium and the world being right, a full year is used for that mourning. And then, after that, we have Yartzites and Yizkor, yearly reminders at different times to continue to allow us to touch those emotions, to feel our grief, but also to envelop it within a cycle of life, so that it is not only a moment of grief, not only a moment of staring at the grave. Judaism does death pretty well. That is to say, we have recognized that this is something that all of us will confront at some point in our life. And as such, we each need to take hand of each other, to be guided through it. And although, while helping another, you may also be slightly put off balance, you are nonetheless helping them regain their footing and in turn, they will do for you, much like in the way that the ritual of the red heifer would create a small imposition on the person officiating in order to help the other person rise from that moment of shock. Judaism wants us to find that balance, wants us to find that peace, and knows that there is no simple way to achieve it. And when people offer simple ways, usually they're just looking for money or offering some other alternative rather than the truth. Where the truth is complicated and life is hard to understand. And if we needed a further reminder of it, well, the events of the last week have certainly, I think, driven that home, as well as our dedication and our hope for peace and our hope for life for all. Shabbat Shalom.